One of the things that differentiates children from adults is the ability to control their emotions and urges. Children can't do that. When they're angry, they scream. When they're scared or cold, they cry. When they don't like someone, they say it out loud. But as we all grow older, we learn to communicate, to verbalize our needs, to simply talk instead of screaming in the middle of the supermarket that all of our favorite chocolate is gone from the shelf. Some of us, though, never learn how to communicate properly and healthily, and how to deal with things that make us uncomfortable, unhappy, or hurt us. Instead, we take our anger out on other people, usually the closest ones to us, our spouses, children, our parents. We snap or yell at them, and then we regret it. Instead of saying, I had a really bad day at work, or I'm not happy in this relationship, we lose control over our emotions and end up fighting. In some situations, it even escalates to physical violence. Worst case scenario, someone might even die. In today's episode, we're going to listen to the story about a musician and an actor, a father and a widower, and eventually a lover who fell in love with a woman who wasn't supposed to be his. My name is Alex, and this is Poland Unveiled. I think even my generation knows Andrzej Zaucha, or at least some of his songs. His voice has been known to me since I was a kid. He sang the opening song for The Adventures of the Gummy Bears, which happens to be my favorite bedtime show. Andrzej Zaucha was born on the 12th of January 1949 in Krakow. A singer, a musician, an actor, a stand-upper, also a husband and a dad. By education, a typesetter. I had to Google what this profession was because it pretty much doesn't exist anymore. So a typesetter is a person, company, or machine that typesets books, newspapers, etc. And the typesetters were employees in a print shop who manually selected pieces of movable type and assembled them for printing. This is from the Cambridge Dictionary and Wikipedia accordingly. And typesetting was the only thing Andrzej Zaucha was taught at school, because the rest of it, singing, acting, playing on instruments, he taught himself. Fair to say though, his dad was also a musician and singer. Not a famous one though. He was a part of a band playing at birthday parties or wedding receptions. Also, Zaucha's maternal uncle played the trumpet. Zaucha's first time on stage was at the age of 8, when he had to step in for his dad and play the drums. After that, he would play in the band on many occasions. In the meantime, he learned how to play clarinet. Music wasn't the only thing he would do as a kid and a teenager. In primary school, Andrzej Zaucha played soccer and swam in competition. Later, in high school, he started canoeing, which he was so good at that at some point he was considered one of the Polish caps for the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo. But he gave that up because he decided to focus on music. One might say, a Renaissance man, and they wouldn't be far from the truth. After his vocational school, Andrzej Zaucha started playing and singing in some college bands. He never went to college himself. At this point, I think this is worth mentioning what kind of music he would do. So at the beginning, when he was a kid and started playing with his dad in the band, it would be more like a live dance music. Later, in one of the first college bands he was a frontman of, he would turn more to a mixture of rock and jazz. Then he focused more on just jazz. In the meantime, he learned how to play saxophone. Some of his songs can also be categorized as R&B or pop jazz. He was known for his deep, dark, and warm voice, which seemed perfect for jazz, along with his ability to play drums, clarinet, and saxophone. His first public performance took place in 1969 at a jazz festival in Wrocław with his jazz band called Dumble. They issued their first album 2 years later, in 1971. Also, in that year, he started playing for the band Anava, where he replaced the previous frontman of the band, Marek Gruchuta, who happens to be one of the best-known Polish singers of all time. Anava, with Andrzej Zaucha, recorded an LP, which is when I believe Zaucha's recognition actually started. Over the next few years, he would also tour abroad, especially in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. In 1983, he issued his first solo album, and a year later, he recorded a track for a musical. Then in 1985, he was invited to take part in one of the most popular Polish music festivals in Opole, to which he would be invited to perform every year up until 1991. In the meantime, he was also cast in several movies. He was also an actor for the SDU Theatre in Krakow. In 1987, he issued his second solo album, which contains his best-known hits, like Byłaś serca biciem, in translation, You're a Heartbeat, which is my favorite song of his, by the way, and C'est la vie, Paris from Postcard. I will put the links in the info box so that you can listen to those if you're interested. So I talked a bit about Zaucha's career. There was a lot going on, and if I were to list every single thing he would do during these over 20 years of his career, this episode would last like 4 hours. So I'll stop here and let's talk about his personal life. In 1966, Andrzej Zaucha met his wife, Elżbieta. They were introduced to one another by a common friend at a disco, and reportedly, it was love at first sight. They got married quite quickly, from what I read. However, I couldn't find the exact date or even the year when they tied the knot. This marriage is still, up to this day, when people who knew Andrzej and Elżbieta give interviews, described as a very good match, true love and also a true friendship. I think it might have not been easy though, especially on Elżbieta, given the fact that Andrzej Zaucha would travel a lot to perform, whereas she was a homemaker. However, I read that Elżbieta was incredibly supportive and understanding when it came to her husband's career, to the point that one may consider her Andrzej's manager. She would help him organize his gigs. She was also responsible for his public image and media relations, if I may call it this way. In 1974, Elżbieta and Andrzej Zaucha welcomed to this world their daughter, Agnieszka. Both the parents were thrilled with this. However, Andrzej was very often absent at home because of his career, so it was Elżbieta who took primary care of their daughter. Whenever Andrzej Zaucha was home, he would try to spoil his daughter, play with her and make her laugh, at least when she was a baby. As she was growing older and became somewhat of a rebel, he had a hard time communicating with her, apparently. It's not like they fought, but it seems like Zaucha was a person who preferred to avoid conflicts. In general, I would describe the relationship between the parents and their daughter as a good cop, bad cop kind of situation. Mom was the one who was obviously closer to her daughter because she was home, but also she was responsible for her most of the time, had to be tougher and stricter, and she probably had the biggest impact on the girl. Dad, on the other hand, was a good cop who just tried to make his daughter happy whenever he saw her, maybe trying to make up for the fact he wouldn't be home that much. Overall, though, Agnieszka Zaucha considers her childhood a happy one, as she said in one of the few interviews she gave. That happy childhood ended abruptly in 1989, when Elżbieta Zaucha died at the age of 39. She had a brain tumor, and apparently the surgery would be very risky and prone to fail anyway. Therefore, Elżbieta decided not to get it. Other sources say that she died of a stroke. Maybe the stroke was a result of the brain tumor. I'm not a doctor, I don't know. Whatever the reason was, though, it was a true shock and a tragedy to the Zaucha family, and I mean both Agnieszka, who was only 15 at the time, and Andrzej, who lost the love of his life and couldn't handle it. When Elżbieta died, Andrzej Zaucha would tell his friends he was broken in half. It destroyed him. I don't know if seeing a therapist would be an option back then. I mean, in theory maybe it was, but who thought about that in 1989 in Poland? What Andrzej Zaucha tried to do, though, to make himself feel better and move on was working, at least at the beginning. A bit of a digression now. When his wife was still alive, Andrzej Zaucha would take her to parties with his fellow actors and their partners and families. Elżbieta got to meet her husband's colleagues, and there was one woman that she particularly disliked. Zuzanna Leśniak, a 24-year-old actress, a wife to Yves Goulin, a director. Reportedly, at one of the parties, Zuzanna sang a song for Zaucha. It was La Vie en Rose, sorry, I don't speak French, by Edith Piaf, and she performed that song sitting on Zaucha's lap. Not sure if Zuzanna's husband was present at the party, but Elżbieta was, and she got furious. She made known to her husband and her friends what she thought about the situation and about Mrs. Leśniak. Elżbieta would tell her friends that, in her opinion, Zuzanna was openly flirting with Andrzej, maybe even had feelings for him, even though she was married and Zaucha was married too. Apparently, Elżbieta was jealous of the young actress and she wouldn't listen to her friends telling her that Andrzej was not interested in his fellow actress and that he had only eyes for his wife. Reportedly, Zaucha never cheated on Elżbieta. However, she was not mistaken about something going on between Zuzanna and Andrzej. Although, nothing happened when Zaucha was married, only after he became a widower. His friends would say that, as heartbroken as he was after his wife's death, he felt lonely. Everybody knew that Andrzej and Zuzanna were friends long before his wife passed away, so nobody was too surprised that they would hang out together after rehearsals at the theater. However, the innocent hanging out together quickly, because it was probably just a matter of months, turned into a full-blown affair. Some people who knew both Zuzanna and Andrzej would gossip that for her it was kind of transactional, that she married a director hoping that he would become famous and that it would help her career, but then at some point she realized it wouldn't be the case, so she turned to Zaucha, who was already a well-known singer and actor at the time. I'm not saying that this was true. Like I said, it was a gossip going around in their friend circle. It might as well have just been a case of people having an issue with the fact that a young married woman had an affair with a 16 years to her senior famous singer. Maybe they really fell in love. It doesn't change the fact that this affair hurt a few people, and in the end, it hurt them too. With that being said, let's talk about Yves Goulin. As you can probably hear, his name and surname don't sound in any way Polish. He was French and came to Poland for the first time in 1987 to study in the acting school in Krakow as a part of the Polish-French student exchange. One day, when he was rehearsing in the theater, and it was only a few weeks into his stay in Poland, he got an unexpected and unpleasant visit from the social insurance workers. They didn't look nice. Two big guys who probably looked more like bouncers than clerks, and an elderly woman who was an interpreter. At first, Yves thought that they were from KGB or something, and that he was getting arrested. But they only came to tell him that he insistently evaded paying his social insurance contribution. Their monologue got heard by a young woman who was just coming to the theater, and she didn't stop herself from telling the clerks what she thought of them and the situation. That with Yves staying in Poland for only 3 weeks, his behavior wasn't by any means an insistent evasion of anything, that everyone pays their social insurance and gets nothing in return. And she finished by asking them how the heck they entered the theater when they weren't the milice, firefighters, or anyone important, so they should get the hell out. It got Yves speechless. Clerks too. They eventually left, and Yves thought that this young woman impersonated everything he heard about Poland and Poles. Brave, stubborn, independent, and never backing down. He was impressed. And soon enough, he fell in love with the woman who kicked the clerks out of the theater. It was, of course, Zuzanna Leśniak. In 1988, they were already married. Yves was incredibly happy. He wanted to make his wife happy and wanted to have kids with her. He loved Poland, He made some friends in the SDU theater where he worked along with his wife, and he also met Andrzej Zaucha. Well, actually, the fact that they met would be an understatement. Eve was utterly impressed by Andrzej's music career, and the two became really good friends. He didn't know, though, at least at the beginning, that the friendship between his wife and Andrzej wasn't as innocent as he thought, at least from her side. That Zuzanna wasn't as happy in her marriage as Eve thought or hoped. So let's sum it all up. Elżbieta Zaucha got to know Zuzanna Leśniak. She didn't like her and was jealous of her. But Elżbieta died in 1989, making Andrzej Zaucha a widower and single man. A year earlier, Zuzanna Leśniak married Yves Goulin, but she wasn't faithful to her husband, who was madly in love with her, and about 1989, Zuzanna started cheating on him with Andrzej Zaucha, with whom she had been friends for years before they started their romantic relationship. In the meantime, Yves Goulin, completely unaware of his wife's affair, is friends with Andrzej Zaucha and impressed with his work and career. But everyone else either knew or suspected the affair between Zuzanna and Andrzej. Theater is a small environment where people know each other well and spend many hours a day together, so it wasn't too hard to notice that something was going on, especially when, after rehearsals, Andrzej and Zuzanna would get to the same car and drive home together. I think that Yves was traveling a lot at the time, and he might have really not noticed anything. On the contrary, he was planning to start a family with his wife and missed her terribly when he was away from her. In contrast, Zuzanna was getting more and more miserable in her marriage, but it seems that she wasn't doing anything to try and either fix it or end it. She had feelings for both men, her husband and lover, and was split in half. Andrzej Zaucha didn't have such a dilemma. After a while, he decided he wanted to move on with his relationship with Zuzanna and marry her, thinking she would divorce her husband. Zuzanna couldn't decide, though. Knowing, however, she couldn't have a cookie and eat it too, she let the fortune roll the dice for her. One day, when Eve was away in Scotland, Zuzanna asked Andrzej to come over to her and her husband's apartment and stay for the night. Andrzej felt safe about it, knowing that Eve was abroad and that there was no chance he would turn up at his apartment unexpectedly. But Andrzej was wrong. Zuzanna orchestrated this entire situation. She knew that her husband was coming home the next morning, and she wanted Eve to catch her and Andrzej in bed together, which is exactly what happened. Eve opened the door, surprised the lovers, or actually, when he walked in, Andrzej was zipping up his pants. Eve got absolutely furious, and following his first instinct, he punched his wife's lover. Surprisingly, Andrzej didn't defend himself or punch him back. He tried to explain that Zuzanna was sick and he was simply taking care of her over the night, but his efforts were pointless. Eve knew exactly what was going on. In fury, he said to Zaucha, "Now I'll have to kill you." Of course, Andrzej didn't take this threat seriously. However, he got a bit scared of Eve, to the point that when Eve wanted to meet Zaucha and talk about the situation, Andrzej never turned up to the meeting. And that was probably a good decision, because Eve wasn't joking. He was heartbroken and out of blood. But he didn't split up with his wife. He still loved her and wanted to be with her. It was Andrzej who Eve was infuriated with. And Zuzanna was back to square one. The situation didn't resolve itself. She was still in a relationship with two men and didn't know what to do. So Eve decided for her. He bought a gun, probably in France, and made a simple plan. He wanted to get rid of his wife's lover and have her all to himself again. This is why at the beginning of this episode, I talked about emotions. As adults, we are responsible for our actions, and we cannot let our emotions lead our actions. Because we are not children. We are supposed to be mature and analyze consequences, explore our options. I completely understand why Andrzej Zaucha didn't take Eve's words seriously, because we say things like, "I'm gonna kill you," when we're furious. But how many of us actually do it? Fortunately, not many. We cool off and choose more civilized ways of resolving our problems. Eve could leave his wife. He could divorce her. That would probably hurt, and maybe he wasn't ready for that. But nobody was ready for what he actually did. On the 10th of October, 1991, about 2 months after Eve caught his wife and Andrzej together in Zuzanna and Eve's apartment, Eve checked in a newspaper what time a play that both Zuzanna and Andrzej were cast in started. He took his car and parked it right by the theater, making sure he could see Andrzej's car, Mercedes. He knew this car well. He saw his wife get in it a few times instead of taking a bus or a tram to work. He waited with a gun. Eventually, after 10 p.m., he saw Andrzej and Zuzanna leave the theater. They ran to the car together, happy after the play. Zuzanna was holding a bouquet in her arms. Eve left his car and approached Mercedes when Andrzej Zaucha was already in it, behind the wheel, and started the engine. Zuzanna was just about to get into the car when she saw her husband. Surprised, she went to him, but he moved her to the side. I think this is when Andrzej realized that something was happening and left his car because, from what I read, he was shot outside of his car, not sitting in it. Eve simply got the gun out of a grocery bag he was holding and started shooting. 1, 2, 3 times. Then, the 4th shot. But this one didn't reach Andrzej. It reached Zuzanna. Symbolically, she was shot in her heart. But Eve didn't even realize. He thought his wife had fainted. This last shot was described as a roundhouse shot, like a roundhouse kick, which makes me think that Eve didn't see or wasn't paying attention to where he was shooting at that point. He saw his wife collapse, and Andrzej was laying on the ground by his car. Eve approached Andrzej, replaced the clip, and shot Andrzej Zaucha 5 more times. There were witnesses, other actors and musicians leaving the theater after the play. There was also a parking attendant who approached Eve, who pointed the gun at the attendant and said something like, "You better go so that you don't end up like them." Then Eve left the scene. An ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, but it was far too late for Andrzej. He died at the scene. Zuzanna was still alive. She was taken to hospital but died the same night during surgery, which was performed to save her life. In the meantime, Eve got in his car and wanted to go to the nearest police station to tell them what he did. But on his way there, he spotted the police car, stopped it, or stopped by it, for I'm not sure if the police car was going somewhere or was parked on the street. He said to the officers, "I have just killed a man. There is a gun in my car," which turned out to be true. The officers took him to the station where, after a while, during an interrogation, Eve found out his wife was dead and it was him who killed her. Eve started crying and vomiting. He said many times he didn't want to kill his wife, that he didn't realize that she got shot. He thought she only fainted. As I mentioned before, he admitted to killing Andrzej straight away. Later, during the trial, Eve would say that he felt humiliated and infuriated. I didn't mention that earlier, but when Eve was in Scotland, he bought some baby clothes, like a onesie, thinking of a baby he wanted to have with Zuzanna. Then he realized that she didn't want the same thing. She pretty openly had an affair with her colleague, and he couldn't stand that. But Eve wasn't proud of himself for what he did. He wanted to be punished, and maybe this is only my interpretation, but based on what I read about this case, I think that Gulen mostly felt sorry for his wife's accidental death. He wanted to have her for himself. He didn't want to share her with anyone, but in the end, he still lost her. He also said something interesting and unexpected during the trial. He said that he finally understood Auschwitz from the executioner's perspective. That what he felt was this wild, insatiable evil, fury, and, in his case, jealousy. And because this is my podcast, and this case makes me angry, I want to say it. Mr. Gulen, these were big words. Maybe too big. It feels like you're trying to compare the tragedy of Auschwitz with killing your wife and her lover. And I don't like that. And if I'm completely honest, what I also don't like in this case is the final verdict. On the 11th of December 1992, Yves Gulen was found guilty of the murder of Andrzej Zaucha and the accidental manslaughter of Zuzanna Leśniak, and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, the legal situation in the Polish criminal code at that time was interesting. You have to know that there used to be two punishments for the most severe criminal cases. There was a death penalty by hanging or shooting in the military cases, or a 25 years imprisonment penalty. The last death penalty was executed in 1988. In 1991, when Yves Goulin killed two people, the death penalty still existed in the Polish criminal code. However, it wasn't used, so to speak. In 1995, lifetime imprisonment was introduced to the criminal code, and in 1997, the death penalty was removed from the criminal code. Practically, though, it hasn't existed since 1988. So in the case of Yves Goulin, there was no chance of a death penalty, and the 25-year imprisonment was treated equally with the death penalty. And the court in Krakow believed that the 25 years would be too severe of a punishment in this case. Therefore, in the court's eyes, Yves Goulin, for killing two people, one intentionally and the other accidentally, did not deserve 25 years in prison. Knowing well that it was a crime with low incentives, and that Andrzej Zaucha was the only parent to his teenage daughter. What's more, Yves Goulin didn't stay in prison for 15 years. He left it on the 10th of December of 2005. The prosecution appealed the case, but the motion was rejected. The court claimed that Yves Goulin was a cultured, polite, and well-mannered person, that he committed the crime because he was sensitive. He valued marriage and family, and when his wife cheated on him, he lost his cool, but in general, according to the court, he's not a bad person. What's more, when he was in jail, he helped other prisoners by teaching them English, maybe French too. He made a few short movies and cast prisoners in these movies. Let's not forget he's a director. And he also got a degree in Roman studies in jail. Therefore, his rehabilitation was considered incredibly successful, and his sentence more than adequate. Also, sources say he gifted Agnieszka Zaucha, Andrzej's daughter, an apartment. Although other sources say that he gave her some sum of money once he sold his apartment, and that when he worked in jail, his wages were transferred to her account, apparently as a way of supporting her financially. Because let's not forget that Agnieszka Zaucha was only 17 when she became an orphan. She lost her mom to illness 2 years before her father's tragic death. I don't know who took care of her when she lost her parents and was still going to school. What I do know, however, is that Agnieszka graduated from high school and got accepted to the very best art school in Poland, ASP, which is short for Akademia Sztuk Pięknych, in Krakow. She's an artist both by education and by profession, a tattoo artist, to be exact. She only gave a couple of interviews about what happened to her father, and it doesn't surprise me she didn't want to talk about it. She said, though, that she forgave her father's killer, that she didn't want to live with hatred in her heart. And this is all I'm gonna say about Agnieszka Zaucha, for it seems that she prefers to stay private, and I want to respect that. Yves Goulin also wanted to stay private, apparently, because after he left jail, he changed his name. But his new name is easy to find on the internet. These days, he works in television as a screenwriter and helps make TV shows. Also in 2021, he directed a movie about a Catholic priest. He has a family. I'm not sure if he's married, but he has a son. So it seems that his dream of becoming a father eventually came true. It's time to wrap this episode up. You must have realized that it was hard for me to stay indifferent and objective in this case. I have to admit, it makes me angry, especially the sentence for the killer. In my opinion, if it was about someone else, someone who killed two people but wasn't a French director, well-educated, well-mannered, the sentence would be different. But it is what it is. Polish culture lost a promising actress and a great musician/singer/actor, and there is nothing we can do about it other than remember them, and remember that as adults, we mustn't let our emotions lead our actions, ever, under any circumstances. That's it for today, folks. Thank you for listening to this episode. Please let me know what you think about this case in the comment section, and I hope we'll hear each other in the next episode.